Since October 7th of 2023, there have been over 6,000 attacks against Jews in Canada, primarily from Palestinianist and Islamist criminals. Has the Canadian government done enough to protect its Jewish citizens? We are joined by Israel's Consul General to Montreal and Quebec, Ambassador Paul Hirschson, to answer this and many other questions. So don't go away. We'll be right back with Alan Skorsky Report. Welcome to Alan Skorsky Reports. I'm Alan Skorsky. For many of us living in America, Canada was always seen as our cousin country, where life is peaceful and serene. Parts of the country speak English, other parts speak French. Americans follow football, while Canadians follow hockey. However, there has been a dark secret rising over the years that has finally exploded to the front lines, and that is Palestinianist and Islamist-inspired anti-Semitism. Consider just a handful of examples that have happened in Canada since October 7th of 2023. The Beth Tikva Synagogue in Montreal was firebombed for the second time this past December. In Montreal, for example, where roughly 10% of the population is Muslim, there have been hundreds of attacks against Jews and Jewish institutions, including the firebombing of the Jewish Community Center and Synagogue in, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Dollard des Ormieux. In Toronto, the Beis Chaya school was shot at for the third time since October 7th. Many government officials have been incapable of condemning anti-Semitism without also condemning Islamophobia, just like here in America. Lastly, a poll commissioned by the Jewish Medical Association of Ontario, which found that 80% of Jewish medical workers who responded to it have faced anti-Semitism at work since Hamas's massacre across southern Israel last October 7th. And that 31% of Jewish doctors, 98% of whom are worried about the impact of anti-Semitism on healthcare, have weighed emigrating from Canada to another country. Tragically, according to our honored guest today, Israel's Consul General in Montreal, Paul Hirschson, Canada's leaders, including Prime Minister Trudeau and Montreal's Mayor Valérie Plante, have done little more than offer lip service in support of Israel and Canada's Jewish community. Ambassador Paul Hirschson is Israel Consul General in Montreal and is responsible for Israel's relations with Quebec and Canada's Atlantic provinces. Mr. Ambassador, welcome. It's an honor to have you.
Alan, lovely to be with you.
Okay, so, I have a number of questions. I know you have a lot to say on this topic. In Canada, your prime minister, shortly after the president of France, Macron, called on Israel to stop killing women, children, and babies. Shortly after, Prime Minister Trudeau made a very similar statement. Here in America, President Biden has been also very wishy-washy on Israel. So I guess my first question to you is, do you find any type of parallel that once a world leader like America and then Europe opened the doors to make it legitimate to attack Israel, that it makes it much easier for Canada to follow suit?
So in short, the answer is yes, but if I can, I just want to make one sort of nuanced correction of something you said. You said a second ago, you said to me, your prime minister, he's not my prime minister. My prime minister is Prime Minister Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. But that's just technical. You're talking about Trudeau, the prime minister now, outgoing prime minister of Canada. In short, yes. Look, Canada, but probably most countries, is very influenced by what's going on in the world and by other countries. And when both, you gave two examples, the United States and France, Canada's number one trading partner and closest neighbor, and Canada's founding colonial power, France, the Brits came later, still to this day has, and the United States ongoing, a very, very significant influence here. So yes, the short answer is that they do, but I don't want to be as nice as you are in terms of letting them off the hook, saying that they're merely following the lead of others. There is also homegrown uh, um, behavior, let's call it for the moment, before I start calling it anti-Semitism, which they do on their own without being encouraged by others.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you another question. I've been a political activist. I grew up in Detroit. So I've been an
Okay.
activist over 40 years. And I saw the writing on the wall because for many, many years, again, here in America, both Republicans and Democrats said when it comes to Israel, we're both on the same page. When Bill Clinton was president, before the Oslo Accords, when Hillary Clinton called for the recognition of Palestine, I knew then that this was a trial balloon. And then it followed with the Clinton administration after Oslo trying to defeat Bibi, followed by Barack Obama after President Bush, who opened the doors to J Street. We know his history of how he treated Netanyahu. And then we saw that during his second convention, when the Democrats were, announcing the platform to their delegates, they accidentally left out recognition of Jerusalem in their platform. They had to have a whole floor, vote, blah blah blah. So that's when I start to see already that where things are going in this country, especially with the left. When do you think in Canada this started, as far as the anti-Semitism, as far as, again, though, to me, my focus is more on Palestinian and Muslim-inspired anti-Semitism. Neo-Nazis, leftists, that's always been there. But the rise and influence of Palestinian anti-Semitism has taken on a life of its own, regardless of who's in power.
So, so first of all, it is an important distinction because there's three different categories. I think again, you're being generous by calling it Palestinian. I think it's more than Palestinian. There's Arab, there's Muslim. We're talking of 1 point something billion people across the globe, and there's the progressive left, and there's the historical sort of white nationalist, call it what you will, right wing. So there are, and these are important distinctions. Each one has its own time and each one has its own nuance. So I'll just throw out one thing and then I'll get directly to the specifics of your question, and that is that anti-Semitism is not new to Canada. In the Second World War, or in the lead up to the Second World War, and in the conversation about Jews escaping Europe in advance of and during the Holocaust, there was a conversation in Parliament in the highest of circles in Canada about letting in Jews. And one of the most senior politicians in the country publicly made the comment when asked how many Jews should be allowed in, none is too many. So this is not new. Now we fast forward to today, or the last 15 months since this war broke out, and before as well. It's not that 10% of the population, almost 10% of the population of Montreal is Muslim. It's almost 10% of the population of Montreal is Arab. It's more than that if you throw in Pakistanis, Iranians, others, if you want to measure it by Muslim. It's a fascinating thing to see how many, actually, to a large degree excludes the Iranians. Ironically, I think most, I may be wrong, of the Iranians in Canada are actually anti-Iranian regime.
Right.
And as a result, Israel's greatest enemy in the world, their expats in Canada actually tone down their criticism of Israel. And every year at the Israel rally in Montreal on Israel Independence Day, there's a small group of Iranians who come and join us but that's the Iranian group. There's been a growing disconnect between the Arab population of Montreal and of Canada and their home countries. And it's not fully a surprise. I myself am an immigrant. I grew up in Johannesburg. I moved to Israel when I was 21. The expat tends to forget why he or she left and romanticize the home country, as it were. They've forgotten why they left. They've forgotten how lousy it was in Syria or in Lebanon or in whichever other country they come from, and why they came here. And that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that they're not briefed on what's actually going on back home. I'll give you one classic example. When Israel finally went in September, finally went into Lebanon to dismantle Hezbollah, we had been having this little war of attrition during the course of the big war in Gaza. Hezbollah is firing at Israel, and we were responding, but it was on low burn. And in September, we couldn't anymore, and we needed to go in, degrade, dismantle as much as everybody saw Hezbollah. We saw a small but a noticeable reduction in the number of participants in the anti-Israel protests in Montreal. And the reason that happened was because the Lebanese in Montreal, who've been protesting against Israel, they started getting phone calls from their cousins back in Lebanon telling them that they're supporting Israel. And the Lebanese in Montreal were very embarrassed. They spent 11 months protesting against Israel, only to be told by their, not all, the only about 25-30% maximum of the people in Lebanon support Hezbollah, but the rest of them stopped going to the protests because their cousins were supporting, back in Lebanon, were supporting Israel. But they have imported, they have not integrated. It's a huge challenge here in Canada. They have not integrated into Canadian society, as, by the way, I don't know, I'm not an expert how well they've integrated into the United States or into Western Europe. And they have imported their antagonism towards Israel and translated it into an antagonism towards Jews. There is nobody on Montreal Island, and I don't think other than the Jews themselves, anybody in Canada who differentiate in any way between Jew and Israel.
Right. That is correct. Listen, you see attacks on Jewish businesses, on Jewish restaurants. It's the same thing. They're not Israeli because remember, they always try to confuse Zionist, Judaism, and then sometimes they forget, who they hate. So then they intermingle them. And if you ever listen to imams, you're familiar with MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute.
Yes.
They have got recordings of all the imams across the globe. And one day it's the Zionists, next day is the Jews. So they don't, and the problem is that so many people in America buy into that nonsense. They're not anti-Semitic, they're just anti-Zionist. And the Jewish left, of course, helps them, propagate this myth.
There is almost no hiding of the fact here in the anti-Israel protest that they're talking about the Jews.
Right.
They talk about we'll have a demonstration outside the Zionist consulate. They don't call it the Israeli consulate, but you're in their chants, and in their chants in Arabic, by the way, you hear it, El Yahud, the Jew. That's the terminology they use. There have been 9 shooting incidents and petrol bomb incidents, all directed at Jewish, not Israeli targets. A Jewish-owned business, Jewish day schools, the Jewish Federation building, Jewish synagogues. If you don't like Israel, that's okay. I've got criticism of Israel as well. You can voice it. I'm not sure that shooting at somebody is the correct way to voice it in the streets of Montreal. But shooting at a Jewish day school or throwing a petrol bomb at a synagogue, what's that got to do? Other than the fact that they cannot differentiate between Jew and Israel. To be fair, I will say that the Jewish community of Montreal, the Jewish community of Canada, is solidly supportive of Israel. You got some fringe elements out there. I've got no time for the nonsense people.
Right.
So, 3 or 4.5 Jews out there who aren't. A couple of Jews go to the anti-Israel demonstrations. Some of them are paid. One or two of them actually are believers. But the Jewish community is solidly behind Israel. So I can see how that bridge is built by the anti-Israel people directly to target the Jews. That doesn't make it correct.
Right.
But I just have to throw something out while we're talking about this. It's not only the anti-Semites that I don't even have as much a problem with the anti-Semites as I have with the authorities who are not addressing anti-Semitism. The
Correct.
anti-Semites I don't like. I'm not going to tolerate. Um, I'm going to defend myself if I need to defend myself, and that's that. The authorities have a responsibility both to the Jews. The Jews helped build this city. The Jews helped build this country. There's a serious Jewish community in Canada which is feeling threatened, and they're feeling threatened with good reason. You can't shoot at a school in Toronto 3 times or 3 different schools in Montreal or elsewhere in the country and expect the Jews not to feel threatened. And they have an obligation, the authorities, not only to the Jews, but to themselves. Look, the Jewish community of Canada is a tough community and a pro-Israel community and a strong and a successful community. They're feeling threatened, and some will leave, but the Jews aren't going anywhere. The Jews are going to survive. But were these guys to succeed in pushing the Jews out,
Right.
we'll be just fine. We've been immigrating for 2,000 years. So we'll go to Vietnam, we'll go to Guatemala, maybe we'll go to Florida. Hopefully, most of
Israel.
them will go to Israel. We'll be fine. We
Yeah.
know how to do that. It's not
Right.
that I want to do it, but I'll do it if I have to do
Right.
it. It will be the absolute catastrophe for the city of Montreal if that were to happen.
Right.
And the authorities have been negligent to themselves as well as to their Jewish citizens. And it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. I don't normally speak out. I'm supposed to be a diplomat. But, there comes a time when you got to stand up on your hind legs and you say, look, guys, how are you behaving? I've had conversations with the mayor of Montreal. I begged her in private
Right.
on day one of this war to draw a line on hate speech. She doesn't have to support Israel. To her credit, on the 7th of October, she lowered the flag over City Hall. Okay, well, that was 15 months ago.
Right.
Uh, um, they have not spoken out against hate speech. Hate speech, this generic thing, you mentioned it. I'm not even saying against anti-Semitism, because then you've got to be against
Right.
Islamophobia or whatever, this holy balance between,
Of course.
So I'm even adopting their approach. Let's just call it hate speech. We'll cover it all. They can't do it, and it's their failure. The authorities, the anti-Semites are even worse. But the anti-Semites, I know, I understand. They don't like me, and if I need to, I will defend myself.
Right. So let me go back a little bit in time. Before Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada was Stephen Harper.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget him because he was the Prime Minister of Canada when we had Barack Obama here in America. And Harper was so staunchly pro-Israel. And I remember I was visiting Israel and I kept running into his caravan. I was in Rehavia and I see this caravan going by and I asked the Chaylim, who is this? He said, it's Stephen Harper. Great. Next day, I'm at the hotel. I'm by security. I can't go down yet. Why? Stephen Harper is here. And then I was at a hotel to go on a tour, and I had to wait across the street. Why? Because Stephen Harper is here. So yeah, so he was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then again, you've got Trudeau now, and I remember,
By the way, I'll just say this. He still is fantastic. I've met him a couple of times. He still visits Israel. He does business in Israel, and he's a friend and supporter of Israel.
yeah, listen, he's great. And then I remember, because on Trudeau, and I remember, I think Andrew Scheer was the last leader of the Conservative Party. I remember reading his articles, also very pro-Israel. Now you've got Pierre Poilievre. I love his
Poliev.
name. Poilievre.
Poliev.
Okay, I'm trying.
Poliev. Yeah.
Poliev. Okay. I have
Yes.
French background in me, so Poliev. Okay. And I'm watching him, and he's like also like a rock star. Um, Maybe not as threatening as Donald Trump, like all hell will be there to pay, but he sounds like he's very much on the same page. So is this against like is Canada's Conservative Party like America's Republican Party that they're all in unison? Um, because for the most part, they march in lockstep with the president. And we've got members, we got the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, hawkishly pro-Israel. I mean, it's a very big part of the party. And Republicans do not get the majority of the Jewish vote. So you can't say that they're doing it, for politics. They're doing it because it's good for America. Go ahead. Any you want to?
I think it's a similar situation. It's not a copy paste, but it's a similar situation in Canada. I'm not, I've been here 3 years, but I'm not Canadian, and I don't have the Canadian political discourse in my DNA. So I'm not necessarily an expert there. Um, I I certainly, I mean, I engage with the Jewish community and well beyond the Jewish community, particularly in Quebec
Right.
with the Francophone community. Um, and I would say that for Canada, let's be clear, Canada is a friend of Israel's. This is actually one of the roots of, I would say, why I'm upset with what's going on in Canada. Because if Canada were not a friend, then I wouldn't have the expectations. We're like, okay, you're not a friend, you don't like me, that's cool. And we'll do a bit of trade and we'll go on. But Canada is actually a friend of Israel. Um, Canada and Israel have had a good relationship for a long time. We've got growing trade. We've got a good tourism, not the last year, but in general. There's a hell of a lot of Canadian investment in Israel.
Right.
There are Israelis living in Canada. There are Canadians living in Israel. Quebec itself just opened an official representative office in Israel last year
Right.
in February 2024. There's a good relationship, and that is the reason why I'm upset, because I have higher expectations. Friendship is enjoyed during the good times, but it's appreciated and measured during the difficult times.
Right.
And that's where we've been let down. So I don't think it's necessarily copy paste to what you said. We've got friends, by the way. We've got friends in the Liberal Party. We've got friends beyond the Liberal Party. The former, although I have to say former, head of the NDP, Thomas Mulcair, who was a candidate for Prime Minister. This was years back, before my time in Canada. He's a good friend of the Jews. He's a good friend of Israel.
Right.
Uh, um, I'm not sure he's all that enamored with where their party. That's the party to the left of the Liberals.
Right.
I'm not sure he's that enamored with where they are right now. But we do have friends there. But yes, you unquestionably you see a more solid or less, if I were looking from the other side, from the left, and you wouldn't believe it, but there's further to the left of the current government of Canada. They're solidly with Israel, the Conservatives. But I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a black and white issue of only they are supporting and only they are opposing. There are nuances. There are good friends.
Yeah, listen, here to be fair, I don't want to be fair, but I will. Listen, no,
Yeah, no,
there are
it's not a
Democrats,
time. It's
there are
not a time in
Democrats
history when we want to be
pro-Israel.
fair.
I'm sorry?
It's not a time of history where we
Yeah,
want to be fair.
right. So,
We're
but
we're we're unhappy.
to be honest, I'll be
Yeah.
honest.
Okay.
There are Democrats who are pro-Israel. The problem is that they've been infiltrated by the left. We have a Rashida Tlaib. We have an Ilhan Omar. We have a squad, they call them. When you
Yeah.
have President Biden, whatever, who at the Democrat convention says of the Hamas supporters outside, some of the protesters have a point. When you had Kamala Harris, who was the VP running for president, telling Americans to not view the war in Gaza through binary lenses, this should scare that. Forget my partisanship, but that should scare the living sh out of every Jew here in America, because now it's
I
coming from and these are not fringe candidates. We have fringe candidates, but these are coming from the top of a major political party.
I think that in Canada, what I see, and it's probably similar in the United States. I did a posting in the United States, but it was I left and I visited many times since then, but I left in 2011. So that's the
Right.
last time I lived. I lived for 3 years in the United States. It's the last time that I would consider myself to be sort of fully briefed and up to steam with the Israel-America relationship and a little bit with the internal dynamic so it's a while back. Um, but I'm sure it's similar. There is a romance between the progressives and the Islamists, which makes no sense. Zero sense. And I mean, I have a poor record of predicting the future, so I don't know if I would put money on this, but it's going to end badly. This romance is going to end badly. It makes no sense. They have nothing in common except for a problem with Israel, which in the last 15 months has manifested as outright anti-Semitism. And they're going to have to sit in here. I don't know how much Hebrew all of the audience speaks, but a cheshbon nefesh. They're going to have one
Yeah.
of the days going to come.
Yeah.
They're going to have to do an accounting to themselves.
Right.
You're gonna have some crazy professor from Concordia University. You know what they call it Hamas University.
Yes.
The
I see the same thing here. I called Hamas University at Columbia, Hamas University at Harvard. You and I think alike.
So no, it's not me. It's students.
Yeah.
Students are calling it Hamas. I've had students say to me, and the students, we've got a real challenge there, but it penetrates deeper than that. A lot of the core issue, the real poison is not everybody, obviously, but in the faculty.
Wow.
I've had students on multiple occasions tell me, no, my lecturer, I'm just going to write whatever he wants. I don't want to fail, so I'll just write the paper to suit. In this particular case, the Israel twist, whatever it is
Correct.
that they may have. But this relationship, this romance is not going to end well. God forbid. Look, it's not the Muslims, okay? I've got 6 Ramadans that I've lived. I'm Jewish. I'm not Muslim, but I've lived 6 Ramadans in Muslim countries. I did 3 in West Africa. I was living in Senegal. I was the ambassador there, and I did 3 in the United Arab Emirates, which is not only a Muslim country, it's an Arab country. Um, I've got a lot of friends in both. Okay, but the Islamists, this fundamentalist, crazy, extreme
Right.
school of thought, if they were to ever win, wherever it would be, okay, barely a nanosecond after the Jews, they would be targeting the progressives.
Correct.
And when I say targeting, I'm being very gentle here because when they target people, it's not an Oxford University debate.
Right. Uh, Um, question. I want to ask you because you hit on the college campuses because right here in America listen, it goes back to when I was in college, but now it's gotten worse because of social media. So we
Mm.
have here Students for Justice in Palestine. All of our top universities are infested, and I'll call them vermin. These are faculty members. They dominate. And I think it was at Northwestern University that there was a deal made between the president or the deans there and the students. For the students to end the encampments, they agreed to offer scholarships to Palestinianist students and to also promise to hire at least 2 more Palestinian professors over the next few years. So they own the college campuses. And that's here in America.
Yeah, I know the phenomenon, and I'm not willing to define it that way. Well, I agree with you, but I'm not willing to accept that will continue. We've made we didn't. I have to take ownership. Okay,
Yep.
we're done with being victims. We're finished with being victims. We got to take ownership. We got to identify our weaknesses, and one of them is campuses.
Yeah.
And we didn't do enough work there. Now, I'm not saying that we are at fault for some of these crazy ideas. But I am saying that we have it within our ability to change this. Let me give you one example. So it wasn't me, it was my colleague, Ido Moed, our ambassador up in Ottawa, okay? There is there is a Carleton University in Canada, which is employing a professor who has been convicted of murder, not by Israel. He was convicted of murder in France by the French. Murder was a terror attack. He actually killed the mother of a friend of mine, of a colleague of mine from the Israeli Foreign Ministry when he was a child 20 years ago, more. And he's being employed as a professor at a university here. So when we became aware of this, my colleague in Ottawa ran a campaign. And I can't say we've gotten to the exact result that we would have wanted, but we've gotten to the result whereby the university has agreed that when he finishes his current contract, which I think was last week, the end of the year, I may be wrong, they will not renew it. What they really should have done was fire the guy.
Right.
Okay. And what really should happen is that the Canadians should extradite him to France, where he was convicted and never went to prison. He found his way here along the route. But my point is this: we can change the situation on campus. So I agree with you, but that's not the vantage point I want to take. We can change it. We can impact it. There is no reason. Look, we built Israel, and we've built remarkable Jewish communities, both in the United States and in Canada. It took hundreds of years. Okay.
Right.
And we are not without the means to change the dynamic and the narrative and what's going on campus today. We're not by any means without that means. We're creative, we're successful. On the 8th or 9th of October, 2023, there was a doctor, a woman in Montreal, who wasn't happy. She already saw immediately what was going on, and she created a WhatsApp group for Jewish doctors in Montreal. And she's contacted a few of her friends, and she sent this link around for them to join her group. And she woke up in the morning, the next morning, and 400 Jewish doctors had joined her group. And they've done some remarkable things since then, okay?
Great.
And the similar thing happened with Jewish professors, some of whom, by the way, I'm not that enamored with, but most of whom are on our side. And so we have the ability, it's time to take ownership of those challenges, because we can fix these problems.
Mr. Ambassador, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute honor to hear from somebody as knowledgeable as you are, in a country that right now it's in trouble, like here in America.
Alan, if you'll allow me, I
Sure.
want to say one thing because I need to be fair. I think that Canada has not behaved correctly. A friend
Right.
has not behaved correctly vis-a-vis its own problem of anti-Semitism in Canada, vis-a-vis the Jews here, and certain things with Israel. And you should hear what I've got to say about the municipality of Montreal. But in between the two of them, I think it would be remiss of me not to say that the government of Quebec has been superb, solid. They opened a representative bureau in Israel during the course of this war. They sent out an accredited diplomat to run the office. There is growing business ties. In the last year, we had an Israeli company purchase a Montreal-based Quebec company for $136 million. There's engagement on technology, there's engagement in culture and art, and the government of Quebec encourages it and encourages it publicly. So I think I would be remiss not to have said that.
I'm glad you did. Listen, again, said before, I'm not diplomatic, but I'm fair. And I want to be honest. And like you said before, we should always give gratitude to our friends because we don't have enough of them. And for them, it's courageous at this point.
We have more friends than we think, because most of them are decent people who are going to work in the day,
Right.
and they come home and they're exhausted, bricklayers and school teachers and others. And all they want to do is just like, I don't know, make dinner for the kids and save up a little bit of money to pay the mortgage and to go on holiday. We've got a lot of friends out there. We've got a hell of a lot of friends. If we had the time, I could give you a few anecdotes.
Listen, we'll have you
Most of
back.
most of
Listen, you have a whole history of your ambassadorships that I want to get into. I just can't do it today, but I'd love to have you back.
We've got good friends in Canada and around the world,
Right.
most of whom are decent people who are just out there working and they're not that interested. It's not that they're not that interested, they're not that able
Right.
to go week after week after week after week for 3 hours, 4 hours to demonstrate
Right.
because they actually need to put food on the table and feed their children and get ahead with their careers.
Right.
Uh, um, there's a small, very, very loud and sometimes dangerous, but minority, which we sometimes mistake in thinking that they actually own the day. They don't own the day. They're on the wrong side of history and they're going to lose.
Good. Mr. Ambassador, God bless.
Thank
Continued
you.
slacha. And our audience, there are Hebrew speakers that listen
Toda
and watch.
rabah.
So thank you so, so much for everything. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Anytime.
Bless.
Thank
Okay.
you.